That I was still gonna hit you with another video before it's all said and done. If you didn't catch wind or hear that I was going another direction, I'm gonna just do math videos because I'm done with controversy. I'm done with theory. I'm gonna bust them upside the head, all them scientists and everybody next, because I'm tired of falsifiable theory. If it's not true, absolute every time, I'm not even talking about what they say about mathematics too. Especially statistics, but the mathematics, they start talking about parallel dimensions and everything, and all their other kind of crackpot theories. They ain't gonna get too far with me if they can't explain it in a regular way. So, you know what I think? Like, I can't explain anybody what I see in the Bible, but I do know one thing though. It's the beginning of wisdom. If you can fear the Lord and as much as you see what's true and you can't deny it. And I mean, I watch Paternity Court, and people be in their head thinking one thing when it's a different, and when that hurts, when that hit them upside the head. Oh, all of a sudden I thought this was the father and that's really the father. That hurts. People get really in their feelings, and it's kind of one of those road to Emmaus moments where it was walking with them the whole time, but they didn't even know who they was walking with. And we perceive things, so even what we see with our own eyes might not even be true, because by the time it come out of our mouth, it had undergone perception and been tainted and corrupted by our own biases and opinions, experiences, and everything. And that's math isn't any different. People can say lots of things, but what we do in math is we try to get on the same page, and we use really concise shorthand to be just enough different from everyone, every other distinction to categorize. You can talk about subscripts and just enough detail, how many subscripts you got for how many dimensions and everything. You can just enough detail to where it's clear from person to person and translatable. And that's very much to do with civilization and higher attainment. And that's what people should aspire to in a lot of ways, is the betterment of mankind, and not only lining their own pockets. But what people do is not what they should do, and that might be where I'm wrong. I don't watch enough Joel Osteen or Benny Hinn, and I don't figure out how to line my pockets good enough. And that may be, but I believe in making the pie bigger for everyone. And if it's not going to include everyone, then I don't got that much umption or gas, to kind of really, really, put my nose to the grindstone and come out with those buckety bucks and ducats and checks and everything. So, and that's not what I'm doing with my math channel, because honestly, math is too general to be that useful. So that's why I'm gonna start with my first love, is trigonometry. They skip over trigonometry in my bachelor degree. They said that wasn't even useful. But really, maybe it is kind of useful, but it's all just so redundant and tautological. And also, too, the calculator. They had taught people how to do math for all this time, when really the calculator can do it. And I was even stubborn coming up, because I had calculators and everything, but we didn't have all this technology of computer software and stuff. And I figure, like, I could learn it better if I just do it in my head and on paper and everything. And I just stubbornly So I might be a good person to get a lot of mathematics from, because I went ahead and figured out what it all meant. That was interesting for me, is to figure out why, and I did. I studied a lot of math, and I was a math tutor for a while, and I really like math, but or maths as they say in England. So, oh yeah, my screen name finna be. I'm gonna change my screen name. So if you see it, don't be alarmed. I'm going with John Teach. They just call me John T. So get with the fake name a little bit. Go John Teach. So if you see John Teach or Monsieur John Teach, that's me, Monsieur John T. So they going hard 6 days a week, using math in a way that benefits them, and accounting is just that. It's rewriting things in a way that benefit them, statistics and all that. Statistics is not real math. They use math to prove their point. It's through triangulation, but triangulation is dealing with a third dimension, which is probability, and all their theories only work for two dimensions, as Pythagoras will show you. You have, and I don't want to hear nothing about. There's no such thing as imaginary numbers, because that line up like a mug when you talk about the trigonometry. But trigonometry, who use it, you just put in your calculator or whatever. But I think it's really important to know why and what is actually going down, so that when you put it in your calculator, you don't go flip mode on it. One way to not go flip mode on everything, because it's really easy to reciprocate an idea, because what you do is, when you come up with ideas, is you creating equations, and that's what the mathematician does. He sets the equation. And so when you draw these equalities, sometimes it's really easy to get the reciprocal, to just invert the numbers. The denominator becomes the numerator, and the numerator becomes the denominator, or what have you, or whatever factor you were times by x is just now divisible by it. You actually have flip mode the whole thing. So one way to help prevent that is actually think about what you're doing. Do you expect it to get bigger or smaller? If you expect it to get smaller and it got bigger, then you want to check back, see what was really going on. You don't need to take the time to really think about it, if it's that you set up the equation properly. If you know your scalars, your factors and everything, and you can just know it's going to get bigger or smaller. You don't have to know that you set your equation up proper, because the proof is in the pudding. You got the results he was looking for. And that's not an abuse of mathematics like they do, where they mean to get it to mean something they don't mean. That's just a little tip and pointer for mathematicians. But with no further ado, I wanted to go back to something I had brought up to ya before, in this book by James Atwell, The Sources of the Old Testament. And this, I think this brother Atwell was actually a bishop of the Anglican Church or something, who passed away from COVID or something. But he was writing this book, and he was the only book. It's not the Joseph Atwell, it's James Atwell. And he's talking about prophecy, and this is really interesting, because he narrows down prophecy in a way that I hadn't thought about in any kind of way. And before I do that, he's going to talk about Mari. So I just want to show you a map about Mari. So if you look at, and this will help with a lot of what I've been saying about the Bible. It's a Mari. Mari is right. Mari is right there, isn't it? Yeah, that's where Mari is. But the thing about it is that's actually closest to the way that they came in, because what they done did was they had to cross somewhere. If they're part of this Chaldean civilization, they had to cross somewhere, and they probably went through Haran in the way far north where the Ugaritic right there, not quite, but they probably came around there somewhere in Syria. And but it would be so easy to conflate Mari with also the Bedouins, or they would be the most knowledgeable about anything from Haran over in Damascus. Damascus is where the junction of the Syria and Arabia is, but Arabia, there's not much in this whole Syrian desert through the Arabian desert. There's hardly anything. The Bedouin mostly live there, and so when they talk about the Midians, um, the Midianites, whether or not the Islamics expropriated that term to refer to something way down here is not really relevant, because we're talking about well before then, but largely somewhere in this proximity, in the desert, and Mari not being the desert, but clearly on the Euphrates River, but also on the western side, but they're much further, towards this third civilization, because you have this civilization, and you have this civilization, and you have this civilization, or many civilizations they're in, but these two, this one are very big and populated, and of course there'd be people here, but these would be Canaanians, they would say, or something along those lines. And but what I'm here to argue, it's just to get to the point, is that Israel is not Judea, and they could add Judea into Israel seamlessly, even though it doesn't seem that seamless. It seems pretty rough in a lot of areas. But there's no reason to conflate these terms, and I think that's something the Islamics were keen to. Is they wanted to point out that it wasn't always Yahweh, Yahweh, this Yahweh's like this other figure. And I'm here in Zechariah in the bridge subsidized JPS, and it says, and they answered, an angel of the Lord, an angel of the Lord. So all you got to do is go to like Blue Letter Bible or whatever and type in Zechariah 1:11, and then when you get the Hebrew, you can look what it say, but the word angel is Molech. The word angel is Molech, and of the Lord is Yahweh. So this figure here in Zechariah 1:11 isn't who bust up on the scene in Zechariah 2. You should go to Zechariah 2 and lift his eyes and saw, behold, four horns, and he saw the angel that spoke with me. So the angel that spoke with him, I believe, was this Malach Yahweh. Malach Yahweh. And said, the Lord showed me four craftsmen, but these are like, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and one on was pale green and carried named Death or something. I don't know. They seem a little bit spooky to me, like how they go to and fro through the earth, and remind me a little bit of Revelation and Job 1, how Satan act. But you know, they say all is well. That's what this is all about. They say all is well. And so this guy's measuring the length, and then here come so they're measuring out the length because they say all is well to build up their walls or whatever they was doing, but here come another angel, another Molech, who has a differing opinion. Well, their big thing was the Lord was one. If the Lord was one, how do come they don't already know what they thinking? Is he schizophrenic or borderline or duplicitous or wishy-washy, or what's the deal here? And this ain't just here, this is all truly out. If you go back to Genesis, before, like if you go to Genesis 22 here, it talk about how Elohim is, or something is saying, like this verse 1, Elohim, but you go and he say offer his son, and then you go down to 11 here, and all of a sudden here come Molech Yahweh, and he's telling them no, something different entirely. He didn't want you to take your son. And that's just in 10 little verses time. And even before he showed this willingness and everything, it was that here he had already hurried on the tail end of Charmander, or I think it was Charizard or something, the king of the Goyim or whatever. He had these confederacy of 5 kings, and somehow he was the leader when one guy is named the king of the nations somehow, but and how he had hurried on the tail end and snuck them and took back Lot and everything. How these angels, these Molechs, are going to Lot's house up in Sodom, and so he's making deals with Sodom and everything before this, and Lot took the wrong way or whatever, but if you really just briefly look at, what was that other one I was just looking at? Oh, I'm so dumb. How come I didn't write that down? Oh yeah, what was that? He do that. Well, there was Judges 13. There was Samson's parents, and how this man of God was like an angel, got a Malach of Elohim or whatever, but that's because they had built in this narrative of the Samuel narrative, and that's of the prophet who's on this distinct position, different than the priest, because the priest had a function, but when they was turned to wickedness, this come into the prophet, and this is something different than the priest, and they have this Nazarite technicality where they can swoop on underneath and undercut the existing order of things, and it's quite complicated, but that's what Samuel get into. But what was the other one? Dang, how am I that dumb? But yeah, you have these two different narratives in Genesis, and like he was fixing to with Pharaoh's son, who might be, like Ishmael, he's kind of thinking, or Eleazar or something, is not his son, whereas Isaac is his son, because when his wife was with Abimelech, the father of Molech, they he has shut down the womb, so therefore it couldn't have been, his kid or whatever. But dang, what was the other one? I was just looking at. So yeah, there was the sacrifice one in Genesis 22, but there was another one where you have this one Elohim, and then you have this separate the Melech Yahweh, and how they I'll have to get back to you on that one, because they wasn't always the same person, and or on the same page or anything of the like, but that's, I think, what they want you to know about the contrite heart, is that when it comes to what they could offer God, this wasn't really what God wanted, and what God wanted is something much greater. And He not didn't want them to sacrifice His son. But the thing is, as the Yahweh has expropriated all of Israel's history to kind of make it their own, what they did was they had put in a whole narrative, and there was this whole distinction, but it become a little weird, where it's all that God just wants to test them. And this gets a lot into the wilderness narrative and the testing there. But to make a long story short, there's these two figures, and this is why I think what the Islamics kind of played on is that the Yehudim, the Yehuda, had long been taking something that was already existing, that we all know Christians do the same thing. They're saying, well, we recognize the Torah, we're continuing on the same thing. But the thing about it that a lot of people don't understand is, yeah, that was true for the day Jesus came on this earth, but there was no such thing as the Torah in terms of the Pentateuch. There wasn't no 5 books of Moses. There wasn't, you can go through the Bible and don't say the Pentateuch anywhere. There is no Pentateuch in the Bible. Maybe in the New Testament you can look up certain words like that, but I don't even think even then. I think those were all the prophets and the law and everything was all talked about as one and everything. But in terms of the Pentateuch, I think that's a misnomer. I think that there were, because the events of Deuteronomy and Numbers and stuff aren't wholly different than those of Exodus. So it's enough similar that it can't be a different event, and it's enough different that it's not simply a retelling of the same event. That's what Deuteronomy is hindsight's 2020. This is well after exile and everything. That this is us looking back at exile and the destruction and what we learned from it. But unfortunately, this is when all of it was written. All the prophets and everything had already got written down after this had already happened. So there's not a narrative that's just clean and devoid of all these earlier traditions. They're mixed together, and it's on us to have to disentangle them because they've been mixed for thousands of years. So this bloke, God rest his soul, he did a little bit of that. I should have showed you that earlier. He talks about the Elohist tradition and the Yahwehist tradition, and there's this core, largely Genesis 2 through 10, where this is strictly from, not strictly, but largely from existing Chaldean narratives. And this, I believe, is true for the Israelite people. I believe that there was, kind of a proto-Chaldean people. Look at the Gebel Arachnites and the Chaldeans and the Maris and different people. There were these people who had ventured that far west, and but they were part of the same nexus. They spoke a similar language, and this presence, by the time of at least the Babylonians, the Neo-Babylonians rather, that's where even we get these terms like Neo-Babylonian, because this, scholars find this wasn't the first time that this happened, and so you can point back to 1,000 years prior, but I wouldn't say that there was just this Aryan invasion. There's just this wave, of people, and then that stopped or something. I believe there was just this steady course of time with the advent of lots of different things, like and the finding of a mediator, which they were able to heat up enough to get it to bend the way they wanted to, and a bunch of other things, but you can look at their pottery and see the connections all the way through, Arabia on into past the Caucasus Mountains and into the steeps and everything. And I'm not saying they're the same folk as Europeans or anything, but there was a steady presence of people from the Persian Gulf, and like whether or not the shape of the tectonic plates, as well as the fact that a lot of the ice caps were still there, may have been a deluge happening to the Sumerian people that the Akkadians used to describe their collapse. And so Persian Gulf might not have even been there, and that this is where we get these ideas of Lemuria, that along Madagascar into India, you have maybe landmass over there, and who knows what came of that. But you do know that weather was in the time where it was clearly stated in Esther, where he had 127 nations, and like Darius did, and all the way to Ethiopia, and to get you to actually believe that there could have been a presence of Asiatics, and now not necessarily like Chinese or anything, but maybe more like Mongolian or whatever, Siberian, to have an influence on, but more like the Danube, way up. There's probably some river, I think I've seen it, that they found ancient historic civilizations going way back. But the thing is, the tundra, the river flows north into Arctic, and in the tundra, you don't have that much, vegetation and stuff like that, and civilizations sometimes far and few between, that people don't act too civilized when it's that cold, and people living in caves, they got these separate caves and everything, and they're living with dogs and everything, and the dogs always love the master, they don't bite the hand that feeds them, and so these green-eyed people love their dogs and everything, and they ended up getting horses, and when they got the horses, they took the meteor and started conquering, all kinds of people or whatever in the chariots or something. I don't really know exactly how it went down, but it was prehistoric. We don't really know how it happened. But so I wanted to get back to this bloke, Bishop Atwell, and it said, the discoveries from the city of Mari on the river Euphrates dating back to the period before Hammurabi and the time we suggest that for Abraham, that is 18th century BCE, throw light on the history of prophecy in the ancient Near East. The archives recovered from Mari include some clay tablets recording the activity of a number of prophets. One tablet records how a person named Shalaboom, that reminds me of like the the people right after the time of Daniel. So Daniel marks the end of the 70 weeks, and Zechariah marks Daniel, he's got the beginning and the end of the 70 weeks, and then you have the 7 weeks ending with Zechariah and everything. But then as you kind of pop up for a second some rabbinical sites, and then you disappear again, where in the Bible it's more generation later. But it says of the Mari, and if you don't know, these are the Amorites. And if you go to Genesis 15:16, you have and in the fourth generation they shall come back thither, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not full yet. So the Mari, the Amorites, they had 4 generations left, and they had the generations before. Then this is when Abraham come on the scene, when the Mariar was already doing something in Medina or in the desert or with the Bedouin or wherever it was in Damascus. Or remember, Paul went to Damascus, he went to Arabia, and so this is before the Yahwehists had expropriated all the history. And but I'm not going to go hard against the Yahwehists, because that I think Jesus was largely in the Yahwehist camp, even though he's undercutting them in a lot of ways, which I'm going to get into. Pardon me. So one clay tablet, I think it was Shelzabar or whatever was Daniel's nickname, or no, that was Sheshbazzar, wasn't it? But no, that was the king's nickname. I don't remember. But I think it was the first governor of Judea who brought the gold, but there weren't any walls or temple then, and they were surrounded by enemies. But somehow the gold was safely there. The first governor of Judea, the son of there's Sheshbazzar, and then there was Zerubbabel. I can't remember which came first. So there was 3 generations in there before Nehemiah or something. But uttered a prophecy while in a trance in the name of the goddess Anunedum. It commences, thus spoke Anunedum, it reassures to nothing. Oh, sorry. I was thinking of Balaam. Sorry. I was about to speak about Balaam. He's about to, but I thought I was offline. It said, to the king Zimmerlin, that as long as he is alert, a revolt will come to nothing. Sorry. The palace is safe and sound, which no doubt is what he wanted to hear. Already there is recognized formulaic introduction to the prophetic words, which was parallel to the familiar biblical words millennium later. Thus saith the Lord, Shalbem is recognized the one who could transmit revelations from the deity, and these were connected to the particular psychological state. His ministry, we may know, was based at the temple. Some Assyrian prophecies, which date from the 7th century, not long after the ministries of Isaiah and Micah, have been published by S. Parapola. A collection of tablets record the words of a number of prophets, both male and female. Several oracles occur on each tablet, carefully deliberately arranged. One of the texts addresses the king. Fear not, Esau hardened. I am Bel. Even as I speak to you, I watch over the beams of your heart. When your mother gave birth to you, 60 great gods stood with me and protected you. And to Christians, I believe everything the rabbis tell them to, as the good no-kites they are, they would say, oh, I'm Bel. He's believing in the bad God. I believe in the good God. That's Satan, my God. And they say the same thing about Allah, who's supposed to be Elohim, as it says throughout those chapters I was telling you, and the one I forgot to. These verses are reminiscent of the prophetic reapplication of the Jerusalem temple oracles of Jacob Israel by the Deutero-Isaiah. So Deutero-Isaiah means second Isaiah, just as Deuteronomy means second law. And this has a lot to do with what I was trying to tell you about the Yahwehistic tradition, which is post-exilic. So yes, it talks a lot about things in Deuteronomy, but that doesn't mean Deuteronomy was written way back when and didn't have no effect on it. But now thus say the Lord who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, do not fear, for I redeemed you. I have called you by my name, and you are mine. And I don't know what he means, called you by your name. Israel, if that means that they are the priests of God or the princes of God or whatever is what that means or something, but I don't know what it means. But I think it means his reputation. I don't think it means like his name. And he redeemed. Redeemed means that they were coming up short. That Jacob wasn't that nice of a guy. He was tricking his brother, and he got confronted by an angel when he had this whole plan where he was going to let Esau go out thinking one thing and he's going to do another still, even after all that, just because he had pretended to change and grovel and things like that. He really had that same spirit of distrust and kind of trickery. And it says the family resemblance is distinct and convincing. The ancient Near East shared its cultural norms which included a prophetic word of reassurance. The central oracle of the third collection is from the lips of the state god Asher, and that's one of like the tribes of Israel, but also one of the tribes of. Don't even get me started about Genesis 9. It refers to itself as the covenant tablet of Asher, divine favor. Talks about the king of Hamath. It's a similar thing. Baal Sheman. That just means Lord of Heaven. That's one of the names of Yahweh, the Lord of Heaven. Come on, guys. Baal Sheman said to me throughout the seers and the diviners, Baal Sheman said to me, do not fear, for I have made you king, and I shall stand with you and deliver you from all these kings who said. So he's draw this parallel between the kings of the ancient. There's the priests of the ancient Near East and how they worked for the king and try to show people to be reassured. That was their function as they're confined in these walls in their temple and stuff like that. They offered reassurance to the people that that they would be safe. And so my man's right here. He goes to talk about Balaam. Now the interesting about Balaam, yeah, that's what I was thinking of, right? Wasn't it? Okay, let's get into that. What was the other one I couldn't think about, wasn't it? Yeah, I think it was this one, where you got these two different people. So I showed you Zechariah 2, I showed you Genesis 22, and now look at this right here. And Numbers 22 is and the children of Israel sojourned and pitched in the plains of Moab beyond Jordan and Jericho. And Balak, the son of Zippor, remember Moses' wife Zipporah, daughter of Ruel. So Ruel means friend of God, and he was offering sacrifices unrelated to whatever Moses' religion was, and and Moab was so afraid because of the people. So this is a continuing thing. Like you can go up to right before they got the law and coming out of Egypt, that these terrible signs in how he hurt the nations and everything in Egypt. That was assigned to the people in Egypt. They would look at it and they would see the wonders of their own destruction, and they would know that God's favor them, that they're His and stuff. And so he said Balak, the son of Zippor, and the king of Moab at this time, he sent messengers to Balaam. Balaam's a prophet, the son of Beor, but he's one of those more like Amos prophets. And Amos said he's not even a prophet. He said he's just a shepherd. And so my man's Bishop Atwell is going to get into that, about how there's this distinction between the Okel prophet, which is the tent prophet, like something more akin to David. Not that David's a prophet. I'm going to get into David, how he actually recognized the priest Nathan, and therefore the priest actually had the right function as a compendium to the king and stuff like that. But that has not to do with what I'm saying right now. Balak, and he sent messengers unto Balaam, son of Beor, to Pethor, which is by the river, to the land of the children of his people, to call him, behold, there is come out of Egypt. So behold, they cover their face to the earth, and they bite over against me. Come down. So he's feeling real scary. Like the Philistines, when they saw, David and all them running up with the presence of God or whatever, they was feeling real scary. So here's them running up on them with the presence of God and everything. They feel real scary, and they say, behold, there's a people coming out of Egypt, they cover the face of earth. He say, I pray, curse me, this people, for they are too mighty for me. Peradventure I should prevail, that we should smite them, and that I may drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom thou blessest is blessed, and he whom curses is cursed. Now the elders of, so he's talking about Balaam, who Balaam blessed. So, and the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the rewards of divination in the hand. They came to Balaam, and they spoke to the words of Balak. And he said to them, lodge here this night, and I will bring you back this word, and the word may speak to me. And the princess of Moab abode with Balaam. And God came unto Balaam. And this is Elohim. And what men go with thee? And Balaam said unto Elohim, Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, has sent me in the same people out of Egypt to cover the face of the earth. Wow, this is too lengthy. Thou shalt not go with them. Thou shalt not curse the people. So Elohim says to Balaam, thou shalt not go with them. To say, lo, thou shalt not go with them. Thou shalt not curse the people, for they are blessed. So that's what Elohim's telling them. Not go with them, not curse them. And Balaam rose up in the morning and said unto the princes of Balak, get you in your land, and refused to give me leave with you. And the prince of Moab rose up, and they went to Balak and said, if you want to go, and he got better people. And they went to him, and he said, tell him, go give him everything that he wants. Just go, give him everything in his house. And Balaam answered, said to the servants of Balak, if Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond. So Balaam's keeping it real. He's saying, even if you give me all the money in the world, will I not curse these people? And now I pray for you, tarry ye here. So he's treating them good. Like, this is an Old Testament thing, where you let them stay and if you let them stay at your house, then that shows love and everything. That I may know the Lord will speak to you. And he's also playing it safe, making sure they're still around in case another word comes. And God came to Elohim, Balaam at night, and he said to him, if the men are come to thee and call thee, rise up, go with them. He said, go with them. This Elohim, who just said don't go with them, is saying, now go with them. So now it's a different story. And if the men are come to call thee, rise up, go with them, but only the word which I speak unto thee that shall ye do. And so it's kind of remind me of Genesis 22 right there. And Balaam rose up in the morning and saddled his donkey and went to the princes of Moab. And God's anger was kindled. This is Elohim. He had just told him. He had just told him to go, and now he's mad. And the angel of the Lord, that's Melech Yahweh. Here comes Malach Yahweh. Placed himself in the way as an adversary. Malach Yahweh is placed against the prophet of God as an adversary when he was just doing what God told him to do. That's this. This is like the third time that Malach Yahweh contradict Elohim. And I think this is really important for when we understand Jesus, because when you talk about Judges 13 and what was his name, Manoah or whatever his name is, Manoah, the father of Samson, he saw this Melech, and this is the people that Abraham was dealing with. So this is the Yahweh source, these are the Pharisees believed in angels and stuff. It was the later, it was after the contributions of Zoroastrianism. This is after the Persian dominance. And the Persians is where we get this Zoroastrianism. And even if it was before that, it was from a proto-Zoroastrian source. And when we talk about the resurrection, this is part and parcel. And this is going to be a big deal when we get into Easter Sunday, which is today. And so I think that's all I wanted to show you about that chapter, but there's more in that chapter in the next chapters. There's this concept of, in 24, the Holy One of Israel, and we see this in Zechariah too, how the Holy One of Israel is also in third Isaiah, Turto Isaiah, that God himself is going to lead the people, and he's going to be in front, and but also in this chapter, we're going to see what my man Atwell's saying, because it has everything to do with what I just read there. Because honestly, the people of Midian and all them, they get eaten up in the upcoming chapters. When we hear about Joshua and the judges, it's often the Midianites get trashed in the process. Even probably later in this book, even, or in the next book, or even so. It became more crucial in the Yahweh source to create this next of kin but not redeemed kind of character, like Ishmael, and you have these different sons, and one saw his father's nakedness, so no longer is it it's the one that there's this one that's not favored, and he's jealous, and he hates them, and so it's on them to bring the light and be the head and the leader, and if he has to lie like Jacob did, then it's for the other person's own good, and because you can't understand his intelligence or whatever, and it's, they don't have to be honest to kind of say, yeah, we superseded, instead they want to revise history to include themselves in it with their own hand. And this is what I think Ezra had a problem with the prophets, because the prophets were during the time of the kings, and Ezra existed after time of kings, and as a good Persian vassal, he couldn't. And it's not because of, as they want to paint the picture, that they weren't allowed to build their walls because the strangers needed to come spy on them and stuff like that. No, it's not like that. And nobody care what you do in your city. An example of a prophet outside Israel is written in the Bible. The story is told in Numbers 22 through 24 of Balak, the king of Moab, and summoning Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse the Israelites. The prophetic word is regarded as having a powerful effect once uttered. But you got to understand that if something's not believable and it was prophesied, then that is a necessary condition for God's anointing of that event in time, roughly. The prophetic word is regarded as having a powerful effect once uttered. However, according to the biblical narrative, Balaam is divinely restrained from cursing the Israelites and instead pronounces blessings. Another example is prophetic activity of Balaam, son of Beor, was committed to writing. This is fascinating. In the excavations of Tel Deir Allah in the East Jordan Valley. Well, that's where that's where this takes place. This is Moab. Moab is Jordan. Ammon and Moab are Jordan. Although fragmentary, the earliest 7th century inscription is prefaced by lamentation and reveals how the seer has divinely inspired vision. The seer, like Amos, in the night, but this is also how Jacob saw a lot of his visions, were in the night and while he's asleep, and you know, through angels and stuff. This is. But Moses, he spoke face to face. It says has divinely inspired vision, a dream in which the night and is privy to a decision of the council of the gods to plan disaster ensuing in chaotic world in which the order is breaking up. So I want you to think about this world breaking up in terms of the Amorites. The Amorites breaking up. Genesis 15:16. That who is this? Who is this? Who is Melchizedek the priest of? If Abraham was his only customer, he wouldn't. I mean, Abraham was rich, but it seemed like he was established before Abraham showed up, and that's the Amorites. And they were the western portion of the ancient Chaldeans, so to speak. Um, but I want you to think of also what I was saying about Balaam. Balaam, you got to understand this zero sum game. This is why I'm done with. This is why I studied economics, and this is why I'm done with religion talk, is because I'm done with controversy. I'm done with theory, and so this is why is because of the zero sum. Zero sum. That means nobody's trying to make the pie bigger. When I lose, you gain. When you gain, I lose. There's no way to play. Competing is for video games and baseball games. There's a game. I'm not playing games with you. What I want is something that makes it better for everyone. This is why usury is a crime, because you're playing a game that you win. It's not fun for everyone. I'm not playing. So this is what is true for Balak. Balak is going to lose. The Canaanites are going to lose. The Egyptians are going to lose. The Hamites are going to lose. This in this narrative, it's successive. It's supersessionary. But it's not only once, twice, but 3 times supersessionary. It's the story of how the Israelites superseded the Amorites and the Canaanites. It's the story of how the Yahwehists superseded the Elohists. The Elohists just had, like the first 10 books of the first 10 books, the first 10 chapters of Genesis, and they had Joshua, most of Joshua or something. They didn't have the whole story and the didactic lessons of exile and everything. So you have the Yahwehists who succeeded the Israelites. They couldn't take their name at first. They had to stay in the desert to the south, and then as part of the empire until they were able to undermine them. And this is what the book of Samuel teaches us. And then it's 3rd time successive when all the nations take the role of the new name and the new body in belief in Jesus. So it's 3 times supersessionist. So the destruction of Balak is to the prophet of Israel, and this by a prophet being engaged in this and declaring it openly to both people, this makes it clear of God's will that this happens before an event. But I'm going to get into the destruction of the second temple. The destruction of the second temple is too prophesied by Christ Jesus, as well as Paul, in such a way. And this is a very powerful prophecy because this is something that Jeremiah also prophesied. And this is a change of fate because the loss of the Amorites was gained for the Israelites. Well, guess what? The prophet said that his sword, his servant was Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was a servant? Yeah, because his will be done on cleansing his own house. It wasn't Azra, though he made it into all nations, he'd leave a remnant of his own, but they had made him a laughing stock and everything. And so we're going to get into it. He lay it down. Mr. Atwell lay it down. They are examples of prophecy as part of a pattern of the way religion operated in the ancient Near East. It was expected of religion that it would underwrite the status quo. It was conservative in its nature. And that the deity would provide security and protection for the state political structures, focused as in the person of the king. And we can see this in Daniel, how the king set up his temple and his Chaldeans and astronomers and everything. But the rhythm of normality in ancient Near East was conceived to be safeguarded by the priest and the cult. With the temple as the symbol of cosmic stability and divine control, nevertheless, there remained moments of sudden, unexpected crisis to be dealt with. A palace revolt, a siege, or perhaps a plague. The prophet was able to provide instant divine guidance as to the outcome. It was normally reassurance that the state deity could be relied upon to bring resolution. The very uttering of the reassurance was conceived to help bring it about. Prophecy in ancient Israel was very diverse. There were bands of prophets, but if you look at all these different groups he talks about, they're all in Samuel's time, basically, and in Kings. in the days of the kings of the monarchy. And then there are the lone prophets who bequeath the biblical books that bear their names of these claimed prophecy, but are reluctant to adopt the type of prophet. And that's what I said about Amos. He said, I'm not a prophet nor a prophet's son, but I'm a herdsman and a dresser of the sycamore trees. There is perplexing diversity of prophecy in Israel intextually acknowledged by the note in 1 Samuel 9:9. Formerly in Israel, anyone who went to inquire of God would say, come, let's go to a seer, a seer. For one who is now called a prophet, a nabi, is formerly called a seer. So here marks a change where no longer is it like Samuel and David, somebody out in the wilderness is going to get the clearest picture, like John the Wilderness. It's part of this temple system, much like the ancient Near East parallels that he showed us in the prior pages. To what extent could all of these diverse expressions of the phenomenon of Israelite prophecy find typical representation in prophecy as we have encountered it in the surviving texts from the ancient Near East? Is prophecy in origin characteristic of the settled land in the context of state security, or should we perhaps look for more diverse origins? Could the individual seer have roots in the nomadic way of life, in contrast to the cultic prophets of the settled land? Is there a phenomenon of war prophecy that accompanied Israel's arrival in Canaan and has roots in the wilderness period? And this is what I was saying about how the Elohists, the first Israelites, had parts of Genesis. They had Exodus and they had Joshua and things like that, you know. But even though books like Deuteronomy and Numbers talk about the wilderness, that doesn't mean that these stories existed before the exile in the way they do. So two facts may be significant. The first is that the prophecy in Israel directly correlates with the monarchy. It is directly correlates with the monarchy. Prophecy and monarchy directly correlate, according to Mr. James Atwell. It is a phenomenon of 500 years. Although in respect to Moses, and I want that to be clear about Ezra, if they say he was the son of God, or he raised from the dead, or he lived in this generation, 100 years later in that generation, or he can write the word of God, or whatever they say about Ezra, or that he would have been given the law of Moses had Moses not been given it, is what they want to say is that ultimately that it does come down to Ezra, because that's where they get a lot of the law of Moses is from Ezra, because they didn't have it all written down and carry it. You know, Daniel, 12 years old, you know, such a good kid. He wanted to make sure that he carried the scrolls on his back, every one of them, and that's why Ezekiel remembered him so well. Give me a break. To what extent could all of these diverse expressions of the phenomenon? Okay, so although in respect to Moses is described as a prophet, prophecy actually appears with Samuel, and the formation of the Israelite state with Saul as the first king. Now, they had got me confused for a long time because someone had told, I was watching a video and somebody said, well, Israel wasn't supposed to have a king because God was supposed to be a king. And, you know, then they ran with it and, you know, got me believing all kinds of stuff. So then I go back and look at it and I go, sure enough, it did say that Israel is not supposed to have a king and this, that, and the third. But that's not the narrative of the Bible. That's the narrative of that part of the Bible. Just want to make that clear. And, you know, they be coming and going sometimes in the Bible. Like, it doesn't, just because that's where something lands right there, you got to keep reading. You can't just stop right there. Because this is where maybe the priest had this function before, and this is what Ezra is harkening back to, because they talk about all kinds of jubilance in the days of Ezra, but they're not really talking about any prophecy. They're talking about reading the law and eating, drinking, being merry, and being extra jubilant. And this might be something where the prophet need not apply because they're getting it by their own self. But I beg to differ. I think the prophet was an incredibly powerful part of Israel history, and that although they probably would say the same thing, they go into feign importance of the law, and that was true for the Deuteronomists too. The Deuteronomists too talk about the importance of the law. So before I say too much, let me just read what Mr. Allo said, because I'm getting a little caught up in my words here. Clearly, the monarchy provided an environment in which prophecy thrives. Something symbiotic is going on. Prophecy and monarchy are interdependent relationship. That is true of Israel for prophecy in all its forms. Secondly, prophecy in Israel does not seem to be particularly associated with the time of crisis. Samuel has to handle the emergence of the state and the development of new institutions. Nathan has the challenge of coping with David's wish to build a temple and secure a new religious model, and Nathan was a priest. Elijah is faced with the state syncretism of the northern religion and the possible extinction of the distinctive Yahwehistic faith. Amos and Hosea have a ministry, because Ezra doesn't really talk about the prophet. When he talks about Jonah, Jonah's wrong. Elijah just makes a brief cameo in a letter, and the letter doesn't have anything to do with prophecy. So I wonder if it's even the same guy. And Elijah, especially being a very enigmatic figure like Elihu in the Job 37, who just pops up out of nowhere. He's not called the man of Judea or anything like that, when we know that they had already cleared out, Jabesh, already. And Jeremiah and Ezekiel have interpreted Babylonian aggression and the final extinction of the state of Judah. That's Jeremiah and Ezekiel for you. The crisis of exile raises up in Deuteronomy, Isaiah. But this is really confusing, because Isaiah is you would think would be around the time of Hosea and Amos, but it's like a kind of temple thing he's going to talk about. Whenever the different responses of prophecy to these crises, certainly it is vigorous at those moments when both the king and commoner are looking for a reassurance, fear not. These twin facts tend to associate prophecy in Israel with the profile established by the examples in the ancient Near East that have been discussed above. That is, its relationship with the royal house and the state security, as well as the ability to bring rapid reassurance at times of specific crisis. If we can press the case, then it is likely that prophecy was not a product of the nomadic inheritance of Israel's past. It was something encountered in the settled land. The religious experience, and this is something in Saarland, because they had forgotten the whole narrative of the past, because Babylon tried to build the tower up to the sky, and they were a nomadic people, but this is something that's changing here in the time of Samuel. And the religious experience of nomad was more to do with the adoption by the deity. There was 4 generations the Amorites had to keep cutting up. So there was Imran, and then Imran's daughter Jochebed, and then she had a son, Moses, and then Moses had a son, Gershom, and his brother Aaron had a son, Eleazar, and but Eleazar is Lazarus. And this generation died, and it was the next generation that was risen up to prominence. They weren't allowed to inherit the land because they didn't believe the report. Who believed the report of Caleb and Joshua? So they didn't make the cut. It also seems the diffused nature of Israelite prophecy has to be sought within the immediate environment of the city-states of Canaan as representative of the perspective of the ancient Near East. We have already noted the temple prophets with their hallmark utterance, "Fear not," typical of the ancient Near East, were mirrored in the life of Jerusalem temple. Clearly, the bands of prophets, such as those encountered by Elijah on Mount Carmel, were a feature of the religion of Baal. They exhibited ecstatic behavior, performing lipping, dance, and cutting themselves with blood that gushed. But that's Jesus was limping. Jesus' blood gushed. An act of prophetic symbolism, which was intended to precipitate divine action in the instance of bringing about rain. We are aware from Ugaritic texts the significance of the dream communication between the humans and the divine world. This is particularly associated with El, the Canaanite deity, Elohim, the Canaanite deity who is understood as Father and Creator. Within the Bible, there are episodes that involve dream communication, such as the story of Jacob's ladder, and they are associated with the fixed sanctuaries of the settled land. Some say that Jacob's ladder is some Yerushalmi addition to like Genesis 14. That is specifically the case for the boy Samuel, who is apprenticed to Eli, or in Greek, Heli. The hereditary priest of Shiloh. Now, in Jeremiah 7, he tells him to go look at Shiloh. Go look at it. Because it was all tore up and broken down. And even the Hasmoneans did the same thing. They wanted to break down the Samaritan place because that was infringing on the importance of their place because they were jealous like that. And they want to have temple one place, you know. And but Jesus was on that side. Jesus was telling them, yeah, that's true. That's true. It's in Jerusalem. That's true. That's, you know, I'm all caught up and going to lose my head over the temple because they got me acting up about my Lord's house, and I'm turning tables, and zeal's eating me alive, and I'm on fire. You know, I'm fuming at them, and my nostrils are flaring, and everything else. We are aware. Okay, so it's a that it was a short communication. Sam is lying down in the temple and he hears God's call. It's a short communication that he knew the Lord. The settled land certainly exhibits the potential for nurturing temple prophet, seer, and ecstatic prophet. They were all examples of human beings who were reckoned to be channels of the divine power, no doubt. Observed boundaries between the different activities became blurred in the course of time, and this is reflected in the inclusive word of the use of the word prophet. If this analysis is correct, and the prophecy as we encounter in Israel is primarily to be understood in terms of the need for stability and security in monarchical setting, then serves to throw into high relief the achievements of the Hebrew prophets. They were responsible for the mutation of considerable significance in the nature of prophecy, as they practiced by them. Prophecy challenged a false sense of security. It challenged a false sense of security, like Balak had. He wanted to hear, good things, smooth sounding. He had itching ears for smooth sounding nothings. A crisis became a monument to proclaim God's judgment rather than to give assurance to his peace. They reformed the familiar in new ways, turned reassurance into goading. Remember Paul kicked against the goads? Goading. Remember the priests went amok? Recast old truths and articulated new ones. Indeed, it could be said that the classical prophets of the 8th century, that is, Amos and Hosea, Isaiah and Micah, were the midwives of the Yahwehistic faith. They brought to birth that which had remained embryonic and largely latent from the moment the Mosaic Yahwehism entered Canaan. The seed of controversy reached back to the period of Judges. Judges. I keep on telling you, the Yahwehistic is connected to Judges, which is connected to the Samuel. But it is prophets who recognized the relentless proclaim, the challenge that the Yahwehistic faith brought to the religious conventions of the settled land. They were the ones whom it fell to administer a little grit to the system. In particular, the 8th century prophets were a watershed in that they articulated the inner controversy that Yahweh only demanded for the Hebrews. For Amos, there was radical moral demand contained in the stark theological insight of the Exodus. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. For Hosea, there was an unwillingness to live with the compromise of syncretism, which was regarded as utterly unfaithful. Yet I have been the Lord your God ever since the land of Egypt. You know no God but me. Besides me, there is no Savior. And already the clouds are gathering in the storm anticipated with Elijah on Mount Carmel. How long we go out limping with two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but Baal, then follow him. It was the 18th century prophets who realized publicly, presented a profound religious insight in the holiness of God was bigger than the fortunes of the state. The holiness of God was bigger than the fortunes of the state. Yahweh could not be subordinated to a function of state security. His identity did not depend upon Israel's existence. Rather, Israel's existence was based upon the reality and goodness of God. And that's what redeem means. Redeem doesn't mean that you were good enough that he bought you. It means he covered the complete cost that you bear. You know, that to redeem, like when you mess up and you got to pay a debt you can't pay, is when the redeemer comes in. If you could pay it, it's like the you don't need a redeemer. And this is critical to understanding the Passover in the wilderness and the generation of the new man. It says, if his people had claims on him, it was only so long as the claims were mutual and reciprocated in loyalty and moral integrity. And Essenes really focused on this. This became very important for Judeans and the Deuteronomists and the Yahwehists. This Deuteronomist narrative of First Kings, where my man Solomon, dragged the whole country down with his not being pure to the law of being different. And this is how Saudis are. They will be trying to be insular and different and act like you couldn't understand, how they think. The 8th century prophets looked at the darkening international scene and threat of extinction that superpower Syria posed on the kingdoms of Syria and Palestine. They recognized in the threat the hand of the one God who was Lord of history and author of the unfolding events. It was not simply that he was chastising him, but The very unthinkable, according to conventional logic, was looming. The end has come upon my people Israel. The end has come upon my people Israel. Amos 8:2. You might want to think Deuteronomy 32. The transcendence of God could not be expressed more radically than that. The potentially new in Israel's faith is released at great cost. Divinity challenges the status quo absolutely. There's fracture between God and the created order. The boundaries of the ancient Near Eastern faith are pushed beyond their limits. The skins have burst. And I bet you the sacrifice of their firstborn was something they did. And they thought that was showing that they feared God, that they thought fear of the Lord was to, work out in fear and trembling how they were going to sacrifice their firstborn so they could live, like Hagar had to do according to what they think is good. And that's not how it is. That God loved them so much that he redeemed them, that he's going to pay their cost, that they can have life. They just need to remember that he loves them, and that they would be redeemed. And if they were redeemed for not being good enough, wouldn't they be thankful enough to love one another the way that he loved them? But they never said it. Something was missing, according to Jesus. John 13:34. The potentially new in Israel's faith released at great cost. Such birth is not without birth pangs. Isaiah talks a lot about the birth pangs, and Jesus used them, but Jesus used it all. Although I believe that there was something happening already of what Isaiah said in Ezra's time, I believe that in Daniel's time, when they're writing Daniel, some of the stuff already happened, that they had an abomination desolation, and this had to do with Antiochus' fourth Epiphanies, the Old Testament Antichrist. But I'm not going to minimize what Jesus said, because Jesus was saying it was happening there and then, and this is very important regarding when they say he was calling out to Elijah and his transfiguration, and that how he secretly told them that Elijah had already come. And so when Elijah comes, that means the Messianic age. And this is the kingdom. This is the resurrection. This is what they had been waiting for. But they were thinking that because it wasn't what they hoped for when Ezra came back, and then they were just following back and back, even though they had already said that this is adding up to be what they'd hoped it to be, because they were following backward and backward, and they weren't making any gains, and they couldn't figure out why. That's how the Christian authors were able to capitalize on these ancient motifs of Daniel and the 70 weeks, which were years. And so when the New Testament authors point to those kind of things, they're saying that they've come to pass. And yet there are these Christians now that talk about how the Antichrist in Daniel 9 needs to come, for them to get what they want, however weird that sounds. The New Testament authors were trying to express how that was coming true in the very near future, because they used time language a lot. They said these things were very near to happen. And it says, they were saying that it's not really, it's walk by faith, not by sight. Jeremiah 11 we're about to read, but I was thinking more specifically about Isaiah 54. Isaiah 54, that he creates the destroyer, So to not fear the destroyer or the arrows or anything. But here comes Jeremiah. But I was like a gentle lamb led to slaughter, and I did not know it was against me that they had devised schemes, saying, "Let us destroy the fruit with the tree with its fruit." Well, you gotta understand, Jesus is Israel. So when he cursed the tree, that was like God cursing Israel. But Jesus is going to suffer the sins of Israel. So Jesus is like that tree, and Jeremiah is like that tree. When they're going to destroy the little lamb Jeremiah, it's like they're destroying the word of God, you know? And so the disciples told Jesus, "Some say thou art like Jeremiah's." And he said, "Let us cut him off from the land of the living." So in a lot of ways, Jeremiah is like this Psalm 44, whatever it was. I did a video about it the other day. You know, we're all like sheep. Um, that Jeremiah is like this suffering servant, you know, and so that his name will no longer remember. Well, this is what they did to Jesus. They wanted to destroy him, and I I feel like they wanted the blood on his hands, their hands. Everyone wants to blame Rome, but they said the blood on our hands, and Pilate washed his hands. So to me, that's symbolic of who's taking the guilt. Now, whether or not you say the blood is a good thing is another story. You know, I think the Christians, you know, drinking the blood is a big affront to Noahidism and the Old Testament and Jehovah's Witness and all these people that say you can't drink blood for any reason. I think that when they started drinking the blood of Christ, this was the end to the law, into the old way. This is God doing a thing, as it say in 1 Samuel 3. And the prophets were certainly fortune tellers. They had to speak hard and unpopular truths at considerable personal cost. To what extent are they fortune tellers, or foretellers rather? It is clear that prophecy from at least 18th century BCE, ancient Near East, was about prediction of specific and fairly immediate outcomes, not 2,000 years. And Jesus said the temple was going to be destroyed, remember? Similarly, Samuel, as a seer, is able to tell Saul details of encounters about to unfold in the day of his anointing, and the sign of his authenticity. Now, listen to, please, these words of Micah. "Hear this, you rulers, house of Jacob, and chiefs of the house of Israel, who abhor justice, who pervert all equity, who build Zion with blood and Jerusalem with wrong. Its rulers give judgment for a bribe, its priests teach for a price, its prophets give oracles for money, yet they lean upon the word of the Lord and say, surely the Lord is with us. No harm shall come upon us. Therefore, because you, Zion, shall be plowed as a field, Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the house a wooded height." There was a connectedness to things which meant that cosmic moral equilibrium had to be satisfied, and that the perceived unfaithfulness and reckless behavior of God's people would reap its inevitable consequence. According to the understanding of ancient Near East, there was what has been described as a cosmic covenant operating universally. The world was so ordered that an equilibrium must be respected. There was defined limits to and responsibilities required of human behavior. This was intensified with the preaching of 8th century prophets into a conditional covenant between God and his people. They had reformed the insights of the ancient Near East relating to creation's order to apply to the structure of God's relationship with his people. The prophets knew that with dire consequences, the intensified covenant had been broken. They could but warn of the outcome. Actions had inevitable consequences in a divinely ordered world, most especially in a model corner of it. The Hebrew prophets were not much concerned with long-term predictions, yet the disciples of these prophets collected their oracles, sometimes commented upon them, and reapplied them to developing historical circumstances. They were cherished through generations until they became canonical. They attained a dignity which their authors could hardly have imagined, yet there is validity in this process. And the dignity isn't something missed by the Catholic Church. But they do the same thing with Paul as they do with the Old Testament. They'll say, this is true because of da 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 da. And that's what the New Testament does. It says da 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 about things of the old and how they came true. And Catholics will sit up there, they'll be like da 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 da, and they'll think, that the words mean something, but it's just a lot of stammering when you don't have understanding. And they'll say about the old way, like they were really annoying how they tried to believe it was just about how God favored them and they wanted to do all these weird things, but really these weird things just kept them separate and different, and that was to glorify their own self. So he didn't really say that, so he had to come clarify. So although there is some da 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 to the old, well, there's da 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 in the new, and and it's just a whole bunch of controversy. And so they, found like they was right. You got Caesar's Messiah going to say, this, that, and the third, and they're going to take it all the way home and run with it, and then they're going to canonize that. So the New Testament gets canonized, and then the Old Testament gets canonized, because then you got people saying, well, yeah, we believed in that book, that book, that book, that book, and a billion others, and y'all said, well, these books, select group prove what we're saying, so we're going to keep those. Well, we're going to abridge that and take out some of this book and this book, and then, say we believe in that, and then there's going to be people that start believing in what they're telling and adopting it and converting to what they're saying, when the whole idea of the people who are going da 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 da, saying that they got Paul's writings, and then they're singing songs about how right they were, and they're reveling in it and doing over accentuated celebratory victory dances in the end zone for 15 minutes, gyrating and everything else, saying all kinds of anti-Semitic things. And then what happened is a bunch of people end up becoming Semites, leaving Christianity, joining Judaism, and joining Islam and all these other Semitic religions based on law and order, based on this idea that, well, what God had changed was actually incorrect, and we need to, and whatever good point you made, the fact that you keep on reveling in it must be something to what we were saying. You must have thought we were formidable adversaries if you went through all this. And so we'll play into this narrative from way back when that you wanted to play into to begin with. And now you got this dichotomy of us and them and everything, and it just gets worse and worse, when the whole reason was written is to be done with it. They wrote it to be done with it, and we just keep going on and on about it, and that's why I'm done with it. because they were trying to tell you that Elijah happened, that the resurrection happened. I can show you in Matthew 27:50 some, where they say the graves opened up. Jesus rose from the dead. So it's not waiting until the last day. It's not that the resurrection happens on the last day. And so we have a lot to play out. We got to recreate this all and do it all over again, because there was something there and nothing was finished. Look at the thumbnail for this video. The third sorrowful passion of Christ Jesus, where they gave him, he was covered in his own mud, and they were going to give him a crown of thorns pressed up against him, making him bleed. And they put on his robe and put a reed in his hand, and they mock him as like a fake king. And they try to humiliate him when he really is the Son of God. He is everything that they claim they were to be better than everyone else. He surely was. He had every bit as much right to any title as any of them had, and yet they're going to put him up there to be flogged and mocked and scourged and crucified. And it's not something they saw. If it wasn't for Paul saying what it all means, he would just be one of the many. Nobody would have ever heard of him. He was not somebody they would have esteemed. They didn't esteem him much. And so he got lifted up and he's king, but who is he king to? Well, who called him king? Pilate called him king. He said he's a king of the Judeans. King of the Judeans, that's the Moshiach. He's telling him that this is their king, this is their Messiah. Pilate's telling them, Rome's telling them that that's their Messiah, their king. They're the one they were waiting for. And they're saying, no, he's not. No, he's not. Kill him. And that's just what happened. And so we see it. We see the Son of God. We see the Mashiach, or whatever you call it, say it, the Messiah, clear as day, but he's looking like he kind of drunk. Like he said, let this cup pass for me. Well, he drunk it. It didn't get to pass from him. He had to drink it. So he's sitting there looking like Dionysus, all kind of curvy. But y'all wouldn't know because you don't have no image of him on the cross. You've removed his image. You thought it was sacrilege to have a picture of Jesus or something. So you took Jesus off the cross. And you just have the cross. So you got the cross in front of your church. You got the cross around your neck. You got the cross everywhere. But no Jesus. And therefore, you believe you're not committing idolatry because you don't have Jesus there, but you have the cross. And so they took Jesus down off the cross. But that was we can still see it. We that believe in Jesus can still see God when he's all looking like Dionysus. Like he doesn't have to be standing firm and proud like Apollo to be seen as authoritative, to respect him. We saw that people don't respect him, and yet we respect him. We love him and value him as a Jewish man, and we don't hate him. We see him for we hold him to much higher esteem than you do. But he was your Messiah, but we're the ones lifting him up, and that's because it's not by sight what it looks like to you, because you need to be the head and lord over others, and then you would believe that the Messiah was here. So you go back to trying to lord over others, just like Ezra, not working with anybody else, doing your own thing, and then no word of the God, no word of the prophet, just studying the law, adding all kinds of doctrine, and name it and claim it, saying that it was there all along, and doing too much. And they do it now. They say Trump, my prophet. I got this Jewish pastor. He's a messianic, and he prophesied that Trump's going to be, Mashiach or something, and therefore God said it. So wait, your pastor's God now, but to say Jesus is God when he was humiliated is sacrilege, because you believe that only dominance is valued and to assert yourself on other people. But this is zero sum. That someone's got to lose for you to feel like you gained. So when the nations are the tail, when you subvert the nations, then you would feel like God is with you. So you're going to continue trying to subvert the nations to force God's hand. And then you can say, look, but that's based on a insufficient knowledge of the Deuteronomist. The Deuteronomist didn't prove, as we just read, that only when they have faith and safety, security, will they be blessed. No, there's propheliers like Jonah that's going to say, oh yeah, you're going to be safe, and these other guys are going to get it destroyed. And he's going to do everything he can to make sure these other guys get destroyed, regardless of what God wants. Because that's what Jonah do. And because Jonah doesn't want the nations to be saved. Jonah wants his people to be all but wiped out, other than a small remnant that you have to have the blood, and you have to have the law, and you have to have this, that, and the third, and then only then will God love you. And even then, there's just going to be a little remnant, and he's going to pass them through fire and everything else. But when we think of how much we love God, we think we're supposed to sacrifice our son. And so why not believe that the whole reason he said to sacrifice your son? I mean, it gets confusing when you read Jeremiah 9, where he's like, oh, never did even cross my mind. And you have things in Judges where this guy said, oh, I'm going to sacrifice my daughter. And she says, wait, Daddy, I haven't known a man yet. He said, go know a man, and then I'll kill you, or something. You have these weird kind of things like that. And it makes a lot more sense in Christianity, where God was simply trying to point to the fact what he was going to do, to show them his expert love, his maximum love. That the whole reason why he even chose an image of a highest sacrifice was only so he would have the opportunity to one day show you how much he loves you, how much he would do for you, how much he blesses you, provides. When you see God, that you can see that he was willing the whole time to give you everything you want, to redeem you, to pay the cost for you, that you didn't need to be perfect. And yet, it wasn't to do with you the whole time anyways, because it's about the resurrection. And the resurrection, you can die and still be redeemed. You can walk by faith. You can be like a sheep led to the slaughter, to not be able to open your mouth, to not even get a word in edgewise, to not have your story told, to left save but Paul not even know the story of Jesus. That we would just, if he hadn't gone to Peter and reconciled, and hadn't specifically gone to the apostles on the road to Emmaus and taught them with the 40 years, would we even know that this was God Almighty come to earth? And would we just never have esteemed him, just one of the many, just scourged and one of the many crucified, that we would just forget him, that it would be insignificant, that if he wasn't God, that it wouldn't even matter, that men have been crucified, and because they're not God, who gives a flying, that there were people like Jesus who weren't born of God, whose mothers were like Second Samuel 13, assaulted by their brothers, and whose mothers begged, "Don't hate me, go to the Father," and try to make this good. Don't be as one of the fools. That somebody like Jesus, whose real father could be one of the fools, never able to marry, just going from woman to woman, afraid from town to town, afraid to make his sin known, and having it pop up in all these ways, and how this all stems from David's sin, his inability to determine right from wrong, to judge, to fall into compassion with a contrite heart. He might say how much he cares about the law, and people use his Psalms to glorify the law, but David wasn't for the law. David did what David wanted. David blessed David because God blesses those who bless themselves, he thought. And so that's what David did. And David's children suffered for his own lack of love, his own lack of dignity, that he, least of his brothers, didn't have enough self-esteem, that only when God's presence comes does he dance. And when he does dance, he insults his wife. And it's it's just what David did. And so there could be a child born to Tamar and to Absalom, or rather Ammon, wicked Ammon, and she would have to find some old Joe, like, Saint Joseph, all old and nasty. He already has kids and everything, but he treats her good, and she's going to stay with him, and she's not, and the son's gonna believe that that's his father, but it's gonna be tearing at him because he's always gonna wonder who his real father is. So he's gonna be about his father's business, running away and everything, and in the temple, cutting up and acting up and causing a stir about it. And then one day he's gonna waltz up in the temple with a bunch of 12 of his dudes, and he's gonna start flipping tables and everything else, and he's going to be all kinds of torn in two directions by all these factions that say this and that, and he's supposed to say something that they can all believe simultaneously and be good at the same time. And here he is helping people, but every time he helps somebody, they're going to wonder if did he do on the Sabbath, did he do it in the right order, and they're going to want to plot to kill him, and everything he shows them, he's got to do it in secret. Hebrew prophecy was the instrument which broke through the boundary decreed by the ancient Near Eastern philosophy, theology, and sociology. In so doing, not only did it change the status quo, but the corollary was the fracture of divinity from the given order of the universe. The world could no longer be perceived as a single continuum between the material and the divine. The consequent expression of real transcendence liberated theology to contemplate and expect God's new thing, his new thing, his supersessionism, as was clearly articulated in 1 Samuel 3, when there was a temple in Shiloh, But God did a thing. He changed the course of history. It wasn't about a king. They were living in tents. The seer was not the prophet. And then he did a thing. And then it changed. And there's a Deuteronomy. There's a second law that has to do with reforms that come from Josiah and stuff that didn't even exist in the time of Moses. Because there was a supersessionism. Zechariah talked about how they'd be called by his name, and they weren't called by his name before. And even Hosea talked about this adopting process when Amos, the wilderness, the adoption. Now, he goes on to talk about Isaiah, and Isaiah being of the temple system. And even though temporally that's hard to reconcile, it's about the Messiah and the temple and what have you. So those who interpreted God's choice of Zion as his dwelling and Israel as his people without condition and without the need for moral or spiritual discernment were terribly wrong. The inviolability of Zion was not a blank check. It was not enough, as Jeremiah was to proclaim in different circumstances over a century later. So, although they would like to, in Zechariah, talk about these walls of fire and how Hezekiah, had everybody safe in there, and that, the Syrians never touched them, and how, what else they talk about? They talk about how Nehemiah had built up these walls, and and that's how they think. This is ancient society. This is safety and security up in there. But they still had to come to terms with this idea that even when Nebuchadnezzar took over and did come in, even so, where they had previously thought, well, only if he doesn't come in, the bad guy doesn't come in, does God love us? Is God good? Is God the real God? Only then, when this God that differs with the existing order is affirmed, and because he favors us, shows it in our success, only then is God supreme. Only then does our God rule. That's not how it works. Because you said it yourself, you have to have this reason for it. There has to be this give and take. There has to be this mutual love. And that's not what happens. The formation of the state was only by anarchists and agnostics. It's not under the law that they had the success. Now, as I had built this up for a couple hours, let me just get to it. Now, I think John 2, I'm going to contradict myself a little bit, whereas I say, well, even though it wasn't really Elijah, spiritually it was still Elijah. Because Jesus said, Elijah has come. So I'm going with what Jesus said. But I'm not contradicting myself because Jesus doesn't say this. Jesus doesn't say verse 21. It says, and then all the Jews say it has taken us 46 years to build this temple. This is John 2:20. To build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days? So this 46 and a half years it took to build the temple is really significant because they break Daniel's 70 weeks into these two parts. There's 62 weeks, and then there's the last 7 weeks. Well, 7, if what they say is true, that's 7 years is what 7 years is 7 weeks of years. So 7 times 7 years is 49 years. So if it took 46 and a half years to build, and or 40, let's say 46 years to build, and Jesus' ministry is a year, then you have like these 3.5 years approximately beyond that, to fit into the time of the Christ in Daniel's narrative. And he doesn't necessarily talk about an Antichrist in Daniel 9. That's something Christians have largely put into there. And so zeal has eaten him up. He's getting them to act up. And he says, destroy this temple. Oh, this is here. Let me read this. He says, do not make my father's house into a house of merchandise. Merchants. These were merchants in there. And when his disciples remember that it's written, zeal for your house has eaten me up. So the Jews answered and said to him, what sign do you show us since you do these things? Hey, if you're going to come up here flipping tables and busting up the walls of the temple, I want to see some sign that this is a prophecy and that the last days are here and that you're the Christ, because otherwise we're going to have a serious problem. What kind of signs do you have? Because you can't just be talking. You got to have signs. They were always looking for signs. The wicked and faithless generation, Jesus said, look for a sign. Wicked and faithless generation, look for a sign. Because they weren't walking by faith. They needed to know. They need, like doubting Thomas. They needed to put their hands in it for it to be true. So they were following around the miracles like crazy. They loved those miracles. So Jesus had to start making miracles secret, because it was causing too many problems. So they say, well, show us some signs then. You say we can't be merchants in the temple? Where are your signs at? Show some miracles. Act like Elijah or Moses in front of the Pharaoh's priests and make your stick do something my stick can't do. But he didn't say he was talking about his body. But he is talking about his body because this is the New Testament understanding. That we don't need the temple. We don't need the state. We don't need the land. Because if we believe that God is the God of all things, that when they destroy the temple, you don't destroy God. If God's house is in a box and you destroy the box, do you destroy God? No, God's. So you start to think they were actually talking about themselves. They needed the temple. They needed the box. They needed to live in a dwelling. God is the God of all people in all places. They were trying to trap him. So he says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. So that it's going down. Someone's getting hurt, whether it's the temple's getting hurt or Jesus getting hurt. But Jesus is telling them, because Jesus is going bam against the temple system, and the temple system is going bam against Jesus because he's acting up in the temple. That's how it consumed him. His zeal consumed him. He is fired. His nostrils are flaring, and he's not using his head. When you get mad, you do something crazy. So he's putting himself in great risk here. And so, but he's putting the temple in great risk because he's prophesying against it. And this is how we know this is a necessary condition for it to be God's will that the temple was destroyed because Jesus prophesied. People say, no, he's just talking about his body. The temple has nothing to do with it. Jesus prophesied the temple was going to be destroyed. He was talking about the temple. Yeah, we can spiritualize it to talk about his body, and we know from our religion that it's really about Jesus. And really, I know it's about Jesus because I love Jesus. I don't care about the temple. So when I think about what this is really about, I would say it's about Jesus because that's more important. That's more meaningful. But Jesus, just like the temple, was destroyed. But it was only in their minds because God was a lot bigger than them. God went beyond their temple. That if he be lifted up, he'll draw all men to him. That the goal of they would need to do this, they need to be sitting there writing, they need to be writing all these really hard to write letters and resisting change and resisting Indo-European language and just keeping it as old as possible because they're going to help you one day. When Jesus went up and did it without even trying, he was just being him, and they made it all happen. So yeah, they did fill their part. That's why the nations rage, because it was they was all working together for this. Judas was in on it. Jesus was in on it, and he was the one dying. It was they were all in on it. They were all working the same thing. Even the high priest said it was better for one man to die than for the whole nation. It was front and center that this is what they were doing. Now, before I leave you, I said all that 2 hours worth of stuff to say this. And that is John 11. Now, St. John 11 talked about how Lazarus only sleeps. This is writing. Lazarus only sleeps. And his thick-headed disciples, they want to say, well, don't wake him up. If he's dying, you're not going to wake him up. How's that going to help him heal? Jeez, oh, peas, jeez. Then Jesus said, Lazarus is dead, guys. What are you talking about? And this was to glorify God. And he's glad that they weren't there, that you may believe. He's going to use this as a didactic. He's going to show them through this experience to not walk by sight. And in that way, the resurrection is here because we're not afraid of death. Believe me, I want to live. I have things to live for. So I'm not the person to best tell you how to do this. But I have hated my life enough. Jesus say, you must hate your life, carry your cross. I've hated my life enough at times to say a few things. And I'm not saying this is what Jesus wants, for you to be as I was, hating his life, and not worried about his own health. But all these people who were thinking that only if I could live in this world, then my God would be vindicated, when God was already vindicated in letting people do this, to be at loggerheads in the temple, to have one side being like, I'm tired of this merchants and hypocrisy, and the other side being like, well, I'm tired of people that don't have my position threatening my position, and they go back and forth. And this ultimately was the destruction of the temple. They lit it on fire trying to keep people out of it. And this is ultimately true of Christ Jesus, that they did not want to view Jesus as God, because to them, this represented the nations having power over them. To have a humiliated Messiah was a loss in their eyes. But we are to gain in this. We are to see how it's not what it looks like, that we could be seemingly hated by others, that they hated Jesus first before they ever hated us. But just because they hate us doesn't mean God hates us. That they were given the Passover, they were given manna from heaven, they were given, just as we were given the blood of and body of Jesus, that all the people in Galilee were given the fish and the bread. You know, he fed all those people. That people would sacrifice their firstborn because they think there's not enough food. The baby can't get its own food, so and the baby, you get hungry enough, does you just think in your head, oh, it's got enough food, and you eat a little bit more because you feel like you're starving and stuff, and you know, people start to hate their own self because of their own hunger, their own desire to live, the devil in us all, and there's the God in of us all. When we see that all people deserve life and opportunity and to love one another with compassion, that God himself emptied himself, that he instituted the Last Supper, he gave his body, his blood, he gave everything that was his. I'm older than he was. He didn't get to experience everything that I'm living now. Everything beyond 33 years old, he didn't get that experience. It was poured out for others. He didn't do anything wrong. And yet, and we don't celebrate Good Friday. And as much as I don't think it's good to just be like, oh, my sins are forgiven, the blood of Jesus on my hands, Moses, sprinkle me with the blood, let's punch him in the face because that means forgiveness for every time I punch somebody in the face, like, no, that's not how we look at it. It's terrible how the temple consumed him. It's terrible how it swallowed him up. It's terrible how we hurt one another. Because when we hurt one another, we hurt Christ Jesus. When we love one another, we love Christ Jesus. And so that gives us an opportunity to be good to God while that's the way we be good to God, not by sacrificing our firstborn because God wants us. No, God rather can give his firstborn to you. He blesses you. He gives the provision. The lamb was given by God to Abraham, the deer or whatever, in lieu of it, the roebuck, or in lieu of his own son. He wants for your son to live. He wants for you to live. He's given his own self for you. There's no more that you need to give him. That if you want to serve God, serve humanity. The priests used to have something called Corban, and they thought they were serving God by making something holy and set apart and taboo. But really, they would sneak in every now and again to this religious house, and the priest that lived in the house knew that he could come in anytime because he donated the house, and then he was getting fringe benefits, like extra fringes or whatever, and that would mean that he could say the longest prayers and have the longest robe, and everybody look at him in the marketplace, and he was the top merchant because he knew the law, the business law or whatever, and it was all fake. He saw something better, like that somebody could pray secretly if they have something to say to God, that if God sees all things, why do they need to do all that? So he's putting an end to the Passover of all this, the nations suffer so we can live. That's not how you are blessed, by taking from somebody else. That's not a blessing. That's how you're cursed, by thinking that if you can get more from everyone else, that's how you're blessed. By robbing, that's how you're robbing God, not by robbing his temple, the Corbin, a better offering. No, God wants that lamb to live on your farm and get to be a big lamb, and so you can get lots of wool from it over the years, and then when it gets to its maximum usage, then you get the meat for it, and you don't give it to the priest. And you don't burn it up so God can smell it. You use it to give it some to the poor and things like that. Because you want to do good, and saying you're honoring God when you're honoring your own belly isn't good. You're defrauding your own family, keeping it from your own family because it could be Corbin given to God. So he's saying Lazarus is not dead. And here come Bethany. Sorry, not Bethany. There ain't no Bethany in the New Testament as a place. Come on, Johnny. You're getting tired. You gotta eat. You gotta eat something. This is beautiful. Thomas, who's called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let's go, that we may die with him." Wow, that's beautiful. When Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as he heard that Jesus was coming, she ran, like she booked out of the house. She was gone, and she ran 2 miles or 1 mile, however close he was, and she's huffing puff. But Mary was just sitting there in the house. But sitting is what you did when you're mourning. Like, it shows that you don't have the energy to carry on. It's like that's what you do. You just sit there and reflect. And so, but even so, Mary had chosen the better part in mourning her brother, and Martha go run out. And so, but she said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. This is your temple. This is your nation. This is Lazarus, Eleazar, the priest in the wilderness that didn't make it, but his son did." This is the resurrection, not in that when you have children, you're redeemed. No, when you walk by faith. That's not what it looks like. If it's what it's looked like, it's not by faith. Knowledge isn't faith. If you knew, there wouldn't be any point to the empty tomb. The empty tomb was written before any of these stories of him walking with people and stuff like that and teaching them. So the empty tomb is mysterious. We don't know why it's empty, but we like to believe. We have faith. So if it's about knowing, then it's not about faith. You have faith that's not, if it's what it looks like, if you wanted a sign, then it's not faith. If you need a sign, it's not faith. Whenever you say, "God, talk to me," and he doesn't talk to you, that doesn't mean he's not there. He's just not at your beck and call. So Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." That's what taking the Lord's name in vain is. To think the God of the universe, who has billions of people to think about, needs to listen to your concerns, that you're concerned for the express purpose of getting more things in a world of exclusivity and limited resources at the expense of another person in a zero-sum game. Why should God be concerned about such vanities? So it says, "I know that he will rise again." She said, this is what they say about the nation and the temple and stuff. Well, if the Messiah was Jesus, then why did the temple get destroyed? Why did we not have a leader and rise up against the nations? That's what they're saying. That's what Martha's saying. She's Miss Busybody, always about the ritual. The cumin and the spice and everything. Missing the weightier matters. I know that he will, but she loved him. I love her. I love Martha. Martha's great. Martha's my sister. I love Martha. I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. This is what the Pharisees believe. This is from Zoroastrianism. This is the resurrection was well known. It was associated with the last day. Well, Jesus instituting the Passover at the time where it is the death of them, but in 3 days is the promised resurrection. It's clear that favor and judgment had flipped. Where the nations had been judged and they had been favored, now they're being judged. And the favor is for anybody who believes. And that favor of belief isn't falling from grace by showing how much you love God, by doing a bunch of superficial rituals. It's by showing how much you love God by doing what he told you to do. And that was to love one another as he loved you, this new commandment he gives you. And it says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. So here Martha thinking about the last day, and Jesus telling her, don't worry, you're going to live. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's come into the world. And when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary. Jesus probably told her, don't call Mary. Don't come out. Don't push me, woman. Don't push me. Don't push me. Don't push me. That's Jesus. I am not here to prove to you what you need me to be. I am here to prove the resurrection. And the resurrection isn't your schema that we're going to wait till the last day and we're just going to mourn. No, the resurrection's here. The resurrection's standing right in front of your face. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? That they only sleep? When you die, you only sleep? And no, it's not like they say you're just going to go down to Sheol and you're going to wait until the last day and you're just going to sit there. No, he said to the thief on the cross, this day you will be with me in paradise. This day. And here he is in Matthew 27:56. The graves are open with him. People coming up out of their graves. And no, they're not stinky and wretched and decrepit and corrupted. No, they're glorious. And as soon as she heard this, that because it's not what you think it would be. It's not physical, all as physical as physically could be. So she pulling Mary, who was doing right, and pulling Mary into her game. Martha pulling Mary into her game to go Jesus into, who knows, bringing about the last days of all people, just so she can. No, I don't even know what she's doing. Don't even listen to me. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus had not come into the town, that he was in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her at her house and comforting her, when they saw Mary, rose up and quickly went out, followed her, saying, "She is going to the tomb to weep there." I think that's what women do, is they're too busy working and they don't have no feelings, so the women got to do the weeping for them. They kind of vicariously lament or something like that. So then when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and she fell down at his feet, saying, so she's doing a little more by falling down his feet. She was in that better portion, but she forgot about the better portion of mourning for the loss of her brother. Even though Jesus is telling her not to, how would she know who had been raised from the dead? And he saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. He groaned in the spirit and was troubled, because she's telling him that same line of talk. She told him what Martha said: "If only you had been here, my brother would not have died." That's not true. This is what they want to tell you about Jesus in general. If the Messiah was here, the temple would not be destroyed. If the Messiah was here, the Gentiles would be kissing my grundle, because that is what the Most High God wants. And regardless of what I do, regardless of anything, that's what God wants. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And he said to him, "Lord, come and see." So he's like, how much longer must I be with this faithless generation? How much longer do I have to suffer these faithless snakes? Jesus wept. Then the Jews said how he loved him, because he's crying. But this is all to glorify God. This is an example. The way he lived isn't his divine nature. This is how he was as a man that he's teaching us to live. Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? They think he's a healer, like a doctor. He's going to prevent them and make them better. But here he is resuscitating somebody. This is very emblematic of the resurrection. This Jesus is saying right here at this event that he is the resurrection. He is the resurrection. Jesus Christ is the resurrection. And he came to earth 2,000 years ago. And they dressed him as though they could mock him. The people who were supposed to be the light to everyone and usher in the way for the Messiah, so they could show him how to recognize him. The remnant was only 70 people. Or 400 or something. I don't know. Jesus said, "Did not I say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Lazarus, come forth. Loose him and let him go. He's not bound by death anymore. It's not what it looks like. It's not what it smells like. It's what we can believe. Can we believe in a transcendence that it's not really based on how much I'm here? That God has the power to give life? That an empty tomb can mean resurrection, even though it's not the road to Emmaus, if it's not the walking and talking, the fingers in the hands, signs and wonders, if it's just an empty tomb, can you believe? Is that enough? Did they need to write that last narrative? All right, I'm ending this video. Bye.